So I'm going to talk about personal APIs. Has anybody heard of the concept of personal APIs before? Cool, a few of you. It's something we've been talking about in OIT, and so I wanted to kind of, more than anything, bring the concept up, talk about it, let you know what it is, and then show how we're doing a prototype using Drupal. So that's the whole reason why I thought it might be a good idea to present what personal APIs are, because we're using Drupal as kind of a prototype. So, and I'm going to do a little bit of a simple review at first, just to make sure we're all on the same page of what is an API and what a personal API is after that. So what is an API? Application Programming Interface, and basically APIs are a level of abstraction, whether that's a programming language and you have the syntax of the language that you program to, whether it's a framework, a lot of different levels that you could say this is an API. Hardware has its own API. So a programming interface, that layer of abstraction. But a lot of times in the software industry today, you'll hear a lot of people talk about APIs. You know, it's the new thing is APIs. And really, to me, that is an insinuation of a RESTful API. So when people talk about APIs, a lot of time in the software industry, they mean a RESTful API. So what is a RESTful API? And Leonard Richardson put together what is called the Richardson maturity model, and REST really means representational state transfer. So that's this is kind of from Leonard Richardson's approach. This is what REST really kind of is in his opinion. And you have HTTP as the transport. You have HTTP as a protocol, and it defines methods and all of the standard surrounding HTTP. So the first level, or level 0 he'll call it, is you're using HTTP as your transport of conveying the information back and forth to the systems. On top of that, now that we've got just your basic HTTP protocol, we have resource definitions and representations. So an example of what resource and representations are, you've got at the top your resource space, you've got a URL, so I'm defining my resource as students. Traditionally, you'll say it's a collection or an array of your resources, and then you have an identifier that says I want this particular student on top of that resource. So here we have our resource design space, our URL space, and that's what we're defining as our resources. And then when I do a request or some type of HTTP method on that resource URL space, I'm either retrieving a representation, which is the second part of the slide here, and it's in JSON format, so I'm getting this JSON back from a GET request on students with an identifier. Or if I'm doing a post or a put, I'll use that same representation to modify or do some other transaction using that HTTP method. So resources and representations on top of HTTP protocol is the next level of REST. So now that we've got our resources and representations, now what does it mean with my specific HTTP verbs? I've got, get, put, post, patch, options, delete, all of that are available in HTTP protocol. So defining what does my post do, or what does my put do and get and delete with my resource space, that's what it means to go to the next level. Traditionally, you'll have CRUD, create, retrieve, update, and delete, right, applications, and so they'll map it to create as post, retrieve as get, update as put, and delete as delete. Imagine that one. And that's your space, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that, but what you do is you map these HTTP verbs, giving semantic meaning with your resources on your URL, and that's the next level. So here, when we do our retrieval on our student's ID, we get this resource that's mapping that resource to the HTTP method get. The last level in the levels of REST in the Richardson maturity model is what is using hypermedia or Helios links. So you got hypermedia and Helios that's kind of driving the application state. So hypermedia as the engine of application state is what Helios represents. So here's an example of using Helios links. You have now in my representation a links section, and I've got a named property, which is our particular way in OIT, in our university API that we're using. We have a named link. It's called students info, and then I've got these Helios links properties, meaning what are the operations that I can do? I've got this representation back, and what other transactions can I do on this resource based on my authorizations? And that helps the client consuming this representation, what can I do next? So that's driving the engine of application state. What different state transitions can I do based on this Helios link concept? So that's REST. And he says that's the glory of REST, when you do all of these levels. So now that we know what a RESTful API is, what is a personal API relative to that? Well, a personal API is a RESTful API. It represents or it interacts with your personal profile information. So my personal API is how I get my address, it get information about me, my attributes, that people could interact with my personal API to get information about me. And also, we're focusing on learning activities, right? So I've got what's called a learning record store, and my achievements, my badges, my accomplishments at school, or whatever learning that I've been able to attain to, I can put that in my learning record store in my personal API, and I can have an API that surrounds that data, and I can get at that information. But it's not limited to that. The personal API could be anything about me that I want to add to my personal API. That's the question marks and the ... and the asterisk. So Phil Lindley, who's an enterprise architect here at BYU and also an adjunct professor in computer science department, he has his Windley.com blog, and he's blogged a lot about the personal API, and he's kind of driving and helping us understand maybe what the vision of what we're going to do, and we have had lots of conversations with him. And so this is a graphic he put together about the personal API, and on the right side you have these learning guides or information how to learn things, and this is really centric towards learning activities, this graphic is. And you get new goals, you define new goals, and you define the new resources, how I'm going to learn things, and put those through to your learning record store through your personal API. So now you've defined your learning objectives, a learning plan possibly, and other resources to be able to attack those learning objectives in your learning plan. Then you go through this transition, now the green in the middle, learning activities. You actually do what you've planned, and now in the personal API you can have post in there the completed activities and represent the competencies and the credentials and degrees in your learning record store that are available, and people, other external organizations and systems can retrieve, like a resume or accreditation or some type of, assessing what you can do or what your capabilities are, or other information about you through your personal API. And that's what we're calling a personal learning system. So in a university setting, this is also a different blog post that Phil put out there. You have our university API that's interacting with the personal API with this learning record store that's underneath the personal API, right? But also devices can interact with the personal API and get information about you, post information about you. And so your personal device, really, our iPhones and our Android phones or whatever devices that we had, can really represent us, and we can give it rights, exclusive rights, to do a lot of transactions on our personal API. But it's really interacting with the personal API. So hopefully that gives a nice context of how a personal API could be used and what type of information can be stored inside a personal API. Now, a personal API is also coupled with this concept that we're talking about a domain of one's own. Who's heard of domain of one's own? Okay, a few of you. So BYU has a domains of one own site where you can sign up as a student, or if you're affiliated with the university as a student employee, or there's probably other roles that can do that. But for free, you can go and create your own domain. So you go and choose a domain name that you want, and they will pay for that for free when you graduate or leave the university. Then you can have a certain time period where you can go and have to start paying it for yourself. Either pay the provider that we use, Reclaim Hosting, or your own provider. You can move your domain to somewhere else. But the concept of a domain of one's own is that it's my digital identity, right? It's a host, a domain that I own, that I put my information on. I can blog on it, I can put my personal API on it, or I can do other things that kind of represent me. I can put an authentication service on top of there that I can use it as my digital identity, authenticate to or authorize people to get information through my resources that I've defined, my personal API. I can authorize people to get information about me, but that's owned by me. It's not owned by Facebook or Google or some other organization. I own my own domain. It's my digital identity space. So that's kind of coupled with domain of one's own, making it useful really in terms of the personal API being embedded inside of that domain, and other people can access the information. So, yeah.
Sorry, domain of one's own and personal API question. What data do you expect? Let's say I create my personal API. What data would I include on that?
Really, right now, there's no standards, right? And so we're just kind of making this up as we go, but information about yourself, your attributes, you know, my hair color, my eye, you know, color, you know.
Who cares? Right. Honestly, who cares about my hair?
Right.
It changes
So,
every day, but, right.
Which
If on my
channel you are,
domain
may
of
change
one's
over
own,
there.
I have my address and phone number and whatnot, and BYU go, oh, this is great. We no longer have to store that data. We can go and retrieve it from this domain of one's own, this API, personal API that I run. And now I get into debt with BYU. I haven't paid my student loan or whatever. So I go and change my phone number because I'm fed up with BYU. BYU's not keeping track of any of this data. Now they're going to my API. What stops me from falsifying this? Like, if we offload the responsibility of this data, don't we also lose some of the ability to maintain this data? So if we're giving it back to whoever we're giving it to, these students to maintain stuff that's of interest, who really cares about their hair color? What we care about is their address and phone number and social security number and other things that might be of interest to us. But they could go and, it's now theirs, they could change it on the fly, they could change it willy-nilly. Don't we run a risk of not having accurate data by handing it off with it?
So I can do that as a student or a person anyway, right? I can go modify my address. I can go modify my phone number, you know, with the university. I can change that anyway. And in terms of like a social security number or other credentialed or certified data, I think you still have to have an organization that says, I certify that that data is still correct, right? You still have organizations that say, or like a degree, like if I can't just say, hey, I now have a computer science degree, or I have an accounting degree from BYU, or whatever. I need BYU to certify that the data that I'm asserting is correct. So there now needs to be an interaction between my personal API and the university saying, yep, the data that I am giving you, now it has a certificate associated with it, and you can go to BYU's API and say, yeah, that certificate's right, it's validated, we say that this data is correct because we've signed it, and it can't be changed without us doing it. So there are certain attributes about us that we control anyway, right? And we can change it when we want to. The university may want to do some redundancy and keep their own copy of the data if they think that that's necessary. but I still have ownership of my own data. I can say when I've moved, or if I have a new phone number, or maybe I have red hair now instead of blue hair, or whatever I want to say.
But I guess the point is, I can go and change my data currently with BYU system, but we log those changes. So if my phone number changes on the day that I start to default on my loan, we can go back and look at what I changed it from and maybe try another number. But if I'm only getting that data on the fly from the personal API, unless I'm logging that anyway. So what benefit do we get as BYU? We offload all this data, but we've got to keep personal copies of to maintain redundancy. I don't understand the benefit that we get from personal APIs.
Yeah, I don't think that you're going to prevent stuff like that from happening anyway, right? Because if I have the university has my social security number, and if that changes, well, that's going to be different. And there's certain ways that they can get information about me. If I'm not a good player, that's going to come out in how that data is associated with other organizations as well, right? There's certain things that I really can't change about myself anyway. And so to be not a fair player, that's going to be probably found out pretty quickly in the system and at the university. So, you're right. There's an element of what's the utility of it. Other ideas about the personal APIs, and if I have medical data that medical organizations need, now they can just go and hit my API and get my medical history if I give them authorization to hit those API endpoints and resources. I don't have to sit there and write it down now anymore, right? All the forms that they give me or something like that, right? But now that I own my personal history, medical history data, or I own other types of my data, and I give organizations authorization to hit my API to get that data.
But if I've gone and had a medical, and I'm storing that data myself, and my medical says something adverse about me, I don't want my insurance company now knowing that I've had a heart attack. So because I'm now storing the data and not some medical professional, don't I have the ability to go and falsify that? I change that and say that, I have a clean bill of health so that my insurance doesn't go up.
Yep, well sure, you can do that. You can just not put that on the form anyway, right? You can do that today by you just omit that on the forms that you fill out. But if you put the information down, they can probably contact the organization where you had the procedure done, or the insurance company that was under, and verify the information from them as well. If you give them authorization to do so, obviously you have to give them authority to do that. But I hear what you're saying, though. There's a lot of particulars for sure, but the concept of a personal API is really powerful in some senses, right? And that's hopefully what we're trying to leverage, and we're also trying to give students a sense of their digital identity and other players at the university, right? And how can we interact with that digital identity and that kind of information? Appreciate the dialogue. I mean, really great comments and questions. Go ahead.
So is this something that you're encouraging students to do on their own, servers on their own website, I think, or?
Yes. So you, as a student, you can go up and sign up on domains.byu.edu and get your own domain. You can put up a WordPress blog, or you have to decide what your domain is, right? And so if it's your digital identity, sure hope that you get your name, right? But whatever you choose, now it becomes your identity. You can change that. You can create another host name later on. But you have to pay for that. But you get your initial one that you sign up for free through BYU. You can't change that very easily, though. Hopefully there's like red flag saying, choose wisely. It's kind of like your net ID. Choose wisely, right? It's forever yours. Yeah, but yep, it's open to students and employees to go get a free domain. Any other comments or questions? All right, so we're learning a lot about Drupal. We were trying to look to see how to do this, and within the domain, cPanel applications, what's available for us besides writing our own cPanel app, right, for the personal API, which may come later on. But we decided to see what's there, and Drupal kind of stood out as, well, this is a really great configurable product. Awesome modules that are provided with Drupal. And so we were listing, you know, the functionality that we felt that the personal API needed to have, and we found a whole bunch of great modules to help us. So custom content type definitions. In the industry, you got JSON LD, some linked data specification and structures. RDF is kind of a semantic web type of thing, so I can decorate my data. If I get my data through my personal API resource, I can put JSON LD or maybe return it back as an RDF payload. And other people, if they can read that type of data, they can associate it with those data types that they understand, and now my personal API data can be understood semantically, and they don't have to necessarily know a lot about my schema in my personal API because I've decorated it with RDF and JSON LD, giving it some semantic meaning. The Tin Can LRS module for our learning record store is out there. Woohoo, that was really kind of cool that we, somebody out there had a Drupal module to do LRS. That was pretty cool. We have the services module and the REST server module to help us define our resources or our content that's in Drupal as RESTful resources, mapping, giving it a URL alias to our content. Has authentication modules, has a CAS module, has OAuth login provider modules. I can connect it if I want to authenticate to my Drupal instance using other identity providers like Google or Facebook. I can connect those things up with these modules. And also I can set up my Drupal to be an OAuth 2.0 server so that I can put authorization around my resources that I've defined. And only let people that I authorize and clients access my data through OAuth. Cool. So part of what I wanted to do is go through and kind of show how I've configured some of these modules. Right here we have the OAuth 2 server, and I guess we'll go into modules really. Let's go look at our modules, and you can see some of the dependencies that are there. If I wanted to, see, I can enable OpenID. OpenID is another type of identity provider protocol to be able to authenticate. RDF is a semantic web specification, and I can you can see these other modules here like JSON LD required RDF to be installed. CTools is used by a lot of things, and I think other presentations have kind of talked about CTools a little bit. Entity references and defining entities and custom entity types was really big. If I want to be able to use RDF and JSON LD to kind of give that semantic meaning on my personal API data, I need entity references. OAuth 2 login provider. Again, OAuth 2 server. You can see the OAuth 2 server, it requires entity API and reference and CTools and this X-Autoload module. So installing a whole bunch of those modules, I'm not sure if you guys have actually gone through and installed the module, but so you go down to here and you have this tar GZ, right? Well, I'm already authenticated to my server, I think. So I think it's in public. my Drupal instance is. So this is like a Drupal install, right? And Sherwin said that I wasn't supposed to do this, but all my modules that I installed, I just installed globally. I guess you can create your own kind of custom module and then put modules underneath that custom module so that you can do that. So here, right, so I can just do a wget. Now I've got the gz, the tar gzip file there. I can do a gzip -d for services. And so I got a tar file. So if I did that, it's going to replace my services directory. I don't want to do that. So that's how you go and you get your tar file and install your module. Once you've installed your modules, then it's available to you in this modules interface. And so you can see here that I installed the OAuth 2 server. So I'm going to go to the configure page, which is in the structure page here, right? If I go to structure, you can see I've got OAuth 2 servers. Other services, I've got some REST services that I've defined, including my Teamcan XAPI, which is my LRS. But so if I wanted to, say, for this example, I have this client, and I want to, this is kind of an anticlimactic example, but I create a client application, and I want to access a resource that's in my Drupal instance, and it's protected by authentication. It has to be authenticated to see that content. And I've also put surrounding that content that has to be OAuth enforced and authorized. So I go in and I'll define a client. I have this first client that I've defined. And I have my client ID, and I've got this redirect URL as part of OAuth. I guess I've got scopes that I define. It's got a user profile scope. Anyway, so I wrote a little app that set up Python app in my domain of one zone. So I go to this client app.matthewhouston.com. And say, okay, I notice that I'm going to now to my api.matthewhouston.com, which is my personal API instance of Drupal. But I'm actually logged in. I guess I could go to something like this and say app.matthewhouston.com. So it's not authenticated. So I need to authenticate. Redirects me to this. Okay, this first client application wants to access data, and so I say, yep, I'm going to authorize that. My app's not all the way working, so that's the anticlimactic part. But it gives this code here, this OAuth dance here, where it gives a code, and I can take this code and do another request and get an access token, and that token gives me access to my content. So that's kind of the OAuth server where I can protect my content. It has to go through this OAuth specification handshake to actually get the data, right? LRS module, maybe it's the data. or content. No, I haven't set up all of this, but so I guess going back to the slide deck, all these modules were there for us to kind of play with and configure out, and that's why I kind of came to Drupal camp, because I wanted to learn more about Drupal myself and how to configure a lot of things. But this concept of personal API, I can set up my own Drupal instance, I can install these modules, but maybe if I had a module that we create and all you have to do is install the personal API module on your Drupal instance, and then there's a nice UI that's associated with that. I can go in and put in my data. I can authorize different organizations and people to access my data. That's our concept of what the personal API is. So that's actually my whole thing. I'm a little fast. But any other comments or questions about the personal API and how it works? And the intent, I guess.
I'm still a little confused about the utility of this, as you mentioned earlier. I mean, what's there to incentivize the student like myself to kind of create my own personal API? You're not currently, university currently using them. Is anybody currently using them?
So our initial project that we have right now today is that there's going to be a directory of domains. So this directory of domains that kind of shows who's got a domain, and we want to use the personal API to retrieve data about that domain. Saying, okay, you're going to install the personal API on your domain, and then if you have a domain, we're going to go out and retrieve information about who the owner is of that domain and show it in the domain directory and other information. But then you can restrict, what information that we pull from your domain, and you have control over that. That's kind of one simple instance. But another idea is that the university will pull your personal information from that personal API eventually. And each student will just be issued their own personal API domain at first, getting it all set up, and then their data can be there. Another concept is with the learning record store, right, that you have assignments that you can save in your personal API. Say, I want to take it from Learning Suite or Canvas or another, where you have interaction with your courses and your classes and your teachers, right, and LMS and or Moodle or whatever you're using. And let's get my assignments in there, build all my learning activities, and now I can build a resume through an API. That's one utility that you could have, so that you have all your learning activities as you leave the university that you want. When a course is done in Learning Suite and your assignments are up there, if you haven't kept a copy yourself, they're going to be gone, right? There's a nice way to kind of save your learning activities and save your own data, and you can do it there. And it's in your domain space, right? I mean, Google does that. You can save it a whole bunch of other places, right? But the concept of you can store it in your domain and you have access and control over the data is kind of powerful. Right today, there's not really anything that's using the personal API. That's the goal. And it's more of teaching the students the concept of how to be in control of your digital identity.
For lay student and lay user, how do you accept learning our some APIs, are we create interfaces for those slide information?
Yep, it's not going to be like this. Hey, you got to go and do this wget and install this module and configure it. I'm not going to be doing that, right? So there's going to be a nice UI on top of this. So our personal API module is going to have a UI, and the student will interact with the UI and configuring everything that makes sense. There might be some, we're going to tackle these technical barriers as we kind of see the complexity, and we know a lot of the complexities, but how do you simplify that with a lot of protocols and standards that are out there like OAuth, right? We know the OAuth stands. We just need a few pieces of information that you're going to get from organizations. Maybe it's as simple as, hey, this organization has requested something in my API. That's going to come up as an event, a notification that I get. And I can go to my personal API and say, oh, yeah, look, there's this organization that wants my data. Okay, I'm going to authorize them to see this, and that. Boom. Now they're authorized, and they can hit my API and get that data. And if I want to go, so they're done with that, I'm going to go revoke their access to that information, then I can go and revoke that access. So there definitely has to be a user interface around this so that it's really useful for the layperson. So that goes back to the content types, right? If I can go and define my content types really well in Drupal, and then I create through the REST server a URL alias to that data, but then it's like, are all personal APIs going to be totally different? So the UI might be saying, okay, here's a standard of what the URL space is, and the UI is going to basically just ask information about you, and it's going to understand the content type and the URL mapping underneath the covers for it to be able to interact with other people and publish some type of like a Swagger document or some other discoverable way to find out information about your API through JSON LD and RDF, right? You can get that information. Oh, here's my API, and this is the content type in terms of JSON LD or RDF, and now I've got schema.org. It has all these definitions about what a person is, about other types of resources that they define as a standard, and we're going to associate our content types with that standard so that other people, when they read that, they say, oh, I know what a person is, because it's the same person as a schema.org person. So the system underneath the covers hopefully can be dynamic enough that it's going to be able to interact with other systems seamlessly. I think if the UI is done well enough, people are going to know. I mean, you're not going to put your medical information on a tweet, right? I mean, you're going to know that the person hopefully is an individual. Right, so that it's really evident that this is personal, private information. You want this organization to really have this. Definitely have some controls over sensitive data and who they're authorizing that data. Make sure that they really know that's what they want to do.
It's just usually so hard to tell. It's just data flying everywhere. You have no idea what amateurs professional managing one day. Obviously, have to make sure whatever the deal is pretty well segregated. So everything else stuff. One thing I discovered in all my time as a programmer, think that they're not going to do it. That's why I do everything I can not to let them touch the keyboard. As soon as you don't think that they're going to type in something. You're good? And I've learned a little bit where I would come to that's the programming. I used to have to hear everything. Everything else that is programming.
That's a good term. Defensive programming. Yeah, I'm really excited for the concept though, and I wanted to get the idea out there so that people are thinking about the personal API and possible uses, and get feedback mostly, right? What other people think about it. A lot of different people that I've talked to about it, medical information has really been a big one that people like having control over and access and giving, automating that process of giving people the information that they need, whether it's a one-time thing or give them access to your API. And resumes is another interesting concept, right, where you can give people your resume electronically through an API, and they can kind of just retrieve that. I mean, But I think one of the main concepts also is this domain of one's own and digital identity. I think in the day and age, and that's one of the driving principles that's part of the project, is helping the BYU community, the students specifically, helping them understand what a digital identity is and what it means to them personally. I think a lot of students understand that, but we're taking it to the next level. But it's in Drupal so far. It's kind of fun. Any other comments or questions? Or I think we got some time.